Today, I'm really excited to share with you the method that I've used with my budgeting for over 10 years now that's really helped me with so many different financial milestones. It helped me get out of a bunch of debt. It helped me work my way towards becoming a homeowner. And it's been wonderful with just having a system that works really well. And it is right here in this book, which is the Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence. This is the 6th edition that I have. And this book's been out since the early 80s, and it's gone through a number of reprints since then. It's a really timeless system, though, and it's one that, especially if you like things that are a little bit more old school and aren't app-based for your budgeting strategy, you will really like this. So we're going to break it down today about all the things that have worked so well for me with working through the Budget Kit over the years and the system that Judy Lawrence teaches about budgeting. The first thing I like about the Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence is that it presents you with a holistic budgeting system. It's not just a book. So it really could probably also be called the Budget Workbook, because it has a section in the front where she talks through kind of a lot of her ideology around budgeting and her strategies that she uses, the philosophy that she approaches budgeting with. But then in the second 2/3 of the book, there's a whole bunch of worksheets. So this is going to be a book that you can either write in or you can photocopy and make, just actual copies to be able to track your budget. What I did with this, because I actually really like Excel spreadsheets, and some people really don't like Excel spreadsheets, so that's okay. If you don't like doing your budgeting that way, don't feel like you have to. But what I found was really helpful was just to take her system and then set up budget spreadsheets that I could then implement right there in my spreadsheet and just have like a year at a glance of my different spreadsheets that are set up the way she recommends. So that's very helpful. I've done an entire video about that I'll link to down below. That's all about kind of how I applied her system and then have Excel so that you can do it completely for free. But again, one of the things that I really like about this book is she really emphasizes action over just a passive book that you read. And so I am a big fan of books like that it gives you actionable steps, or it gives you prompts, or it gives you worksheets where you feel like you can really learn through doing. If you're a person like me that you learn through trying things, you learn through doing things, you learn through failing at things, you learn through making mistakes at things, you'll really like this book because it gives you some really actionable things to try and see how they work for you. Adapt if you want to adapt some of the principles, and if it doesn't work for you at all, no harm in that, but it's always great to just try new things. But again, if you'd like to have a look at kind of how I've adapted her system, I will link to my video in the description. Another thing I really like about the Budget Kit is that she really talks through her philosophy around budgeting, and specifically a concept of deciding who's going to be the family budget director, as she calls it. So she really recommends that actually, if you're in a couple and you're managing money together, that you take turns being the family budget director, or at a bare minimum, make sure that everyone in the family is informed about how the budgets are being run, how the accounts are set up with your banking systems, where all of the investment accounts are. Make sure that you don't just have one person in the family that manages all the money and knows where everything is, and then if something happens with them and they're not able to handle the money, then the other person in the family is scrambling because they've never touched it, because that was just the other person's role. So she said, even if you have someone who predominantly leans into that role of family budget director more, make sure the other person is also informed. I know the way we've implemented this in our family over the last 10 years now is we will sit down once a month and do a budget review. So we will sit down, and this isn't every single month. Sometimes we'll go a little bit longer than that if we're both very, very busy. But normally what we'll do is sit down once a month and just do a good overview of where our budget is, look through if there's any items that we feel like we can do without and move more towards savings or more towards retirement investments, for example, and just make sure that everybody's really informed on where the money is going. And that can be just a really good exercise to have a structured time where you sit down and talk with your partner about money, rather than having it be a discussion that you end up having after work over dinner when everybody's tired on a weeknight and it turns into a big argument. Much better to just have a structured time over coffee on a Saturday or Sunday morning where everybody's feeling pretty chill. And then whoever's the family budget director can sit down and kind of brief the other partner about the money. It can also be a good time too if you have teens or high school students, college students who you're trying to teach about money as well. Bring them into this discussion as well. It is really, really important if you have children in your household. Start educating them about money as early as possible, because it is not a good time to wait until they're in their 20s and then try to be scrambling to teach them all the things they need to know. So the sooner you can start that, the better. There's all kinds of great resources for this. There are youth checking accounts and youth savings accounts that will be linked to debit cards at most major banking institutions. And so it's a really good way, with this whole concept of having a family budget director, it's a really good way to really sit down and model for your children how to manage money as a couple as well, because it's just something that we a lot of times learn about roles in finances watching our parents, and maybe the way they dealt with it worked really well for them, but maybe that's not going to work as well for us and our partner. And so it's really helpful if you can model having it be a collaborative discussion that involves everybody who's making money in the household, and also model that for your children about it being a collaborative situation and a collaborative discussion that's fun and engaging. That's a really valuable gift that you can give your children then, that hopefully they can even pass along to the next generation as well, of have it be something that's very transparent and very much open for dialogue, and everybody can give feedback about how they feel about how the family money is being handled. And it's just it can be an opportunity for connection. Money often is very divisive in families. It can often be, I think it's usually up in the top 10 causes, reasons that people cite for divorce. So money can be a real source of friction in families and in marriages. And so just to be able to instead use it as an opportunity for connection, for collaboration, and for modeling that to any children that you have can be very, very valuable. So again, super great book with the budget kit, but that was one thing I really liked about that. You can see, in the beginning of the book, you've got a lot of her kind of budgeting philosophy, and she talks a lot about money mindset. She's just a very grounded person, and I love her perspective. And then towards the back, you have a lot more workbooks and worksheets and all of this. And again, she actually recommends that you can photocopy these. And these might look a little bit overwhelming, but if you read through everything, you can adapt this however you like. And again, I've found it helpful to do it in Excel, but that's just the way I've adapted this. Now, again, if you're an app-based person, this is probably not going to be your cup of tea, and that is absolutely fine as well. But she has a lot of great concepts about how to think about money, how to approach it as a family, that can be helpful in that first third of the book if you just want to pick it up just specifically for that. The second thing I really like about the Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence is that it is built for the real world. So if you've ever tried budgeting before, you might have had a very negative experience with it, because a lot of people do. A lot of people don't like to budget. They don't actually even like to think about their money that much. You're obviously not one of those people if you're sitting here watching this video. So you're obviously very engaged with your money, very interested in educating yourself about this and becoming financially confident, financially savvy. So that's fantastic. And I'm so glad you chose to join me today. So the thing though with budgeting is a lot of people will try a method for a while, but it might be too rigid or it's not built for the real world. And so then it will just obviously fail if it's too rigid, doesn't account for human behavior being what it is, where, we'll know in our heads exactly how much we have to spend for discretionary spending, and then we'll go over it anyway. And how many times have you done this? I know this has happened to me so many times in the past. The way we approach money, and this is why I work in behavioral finance, because I love this part of finance, is that, the way we approach money, because we're human, it's very emotional, and it can sometimes be illogical. It can sometimes be irrational, whether that's in our spending behavior or our investing behavior. And so it's just important to acknowledge and honor that. So I feel like the Budget Kit really takes us being human into perspective and into account, which is why it's a very sustainable method for budgeting. And then it can really just help you come up with a real world budget for your life that flexes with your life. One of the most valuable pieces that I learned over the last 10 years of using this method and really clicked for me, you know how you get those moments when you're reading through a new book and something from the author just clicks. And the thing for me, among other things about this book, was the concept of having something called a reserve savings account. If you've been with me for a while, you've heard me talk about this many times before. Well, I learned it from Judy Lawrence. So credit where credit is due there. But anyway, having an account that is separate from your emergency account, that's a savings account, maybe you keep it in high yield savings or somewhere where it's earning a little bit of interest, but you can easily access it without penalties. And then it's just there for those things that come up, you know, where you have a car repair that costs several hundred or several $1,000s more than you thought it was going to, or your dog had to go to the vet, or you had an insurance copay that ran way over and didn't have money anywhere else for it that month. The reserve savings account is something that has saved me so many times from running over budget, because it's basically just that little fund to say, life happens, life can get expensive. Sometimes there's just expenses that we haven't accounted for, and I don't necessarily want to tap into emergency savings to be able to cover that, but I also don't want to run balances on the credit cards. And so using that reserve savings account can just be a godsend. So that's a really wonderful part of her budgeting philosophy and the system that I learned from her that I've implemented and has just really helped me stay, by and large, very much on track with my budgets over the last 10 years of using this method. The third thing I really love about the Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence is she teaches you how to stabilize your finances while building your confidence around money. And so it's really geared towards beginners. It's geared towards people who are starting over, whether that's in their finances or in their life, or they might be learning money management for the first time. Maybe you were in a situation for a long time where only one person in the family or one person in your marriage or your partnership managed the money, and all of a sudden you're having to be the family budget director and you've never done it before, and it might feel really stressful and really frightening and really overwhelming, and that's understandable because it is a lot. I mean, for all the things that it takes to be able to manage your money wisely and well, it's not necessarily very complicated at all, but it's just understanding some core things about being able to track what you're earning, where it's going in terms of what you're spending your money on, and making sure you're growing your money so that you're having money down the road for retirement and for emergency savings. And really, really key to just understand that it's not necessarily ultra complicated, but having a system to deal with it will really simplify things for you. So this book is really geared towards beginners. If you're an intermediate to advanced budgeter and you've been doing this for a long time, this book might not be as relevant to you, but I find I learned something from every single book I read, from every single course I take online, from every single presentation or masterclass that I watch. Even if I get into it with the mindset of like, oh, there's not going to be that much for me here, I get surprised every single time. So now I just try to go into new experiences and new classes and new, master classes and all of this with a really open mind and say, what can I take away from this? Because I know I don't know everything. There's so much to learn, not just in personal finance, but just in life in general. There's so much to learn, and I never pretend that I know it all whatsoever. So even if you're an intermediate to advanced in your financial skills with money management, you'll probably still enjoy this book, but it's specifically geared towards beginners and towards people who might feel a little shaky with their confidence around money. And I think that's why this has been such an enduring book that's been out since the 80s. And it's just endured and been in print for many, many years now because it works and because it's really a good confidence boost as well. So let's talk pros and cons of the Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence. So I would say the pros are that it's a solidly great workbook if you're just beginning with your budgeting skills or you're looking for a system that will really help you just kind of boil things down to their simplest level and help you feel really in control of your money. So that would be some wonderful things that are absolute pros about this book. She also just has a really gracious understanding way of writing and really encouraging. And I think that's always important too when it comes to finance, especially when it comes to something as tricky as budgeting can be. Now, I would say the cons are, because it has been out for a while, there's parts of it that are a little bit dated. So you will notice that as you go through it, but most of it's very timeless and very classic. Also, if you're more leaning towards app-based budgeting, if you use something like Monarch, for example, or you really prefer having things where it's all app-based and a lot of visuals, that this book won't be for you. If you like things that are like very visual and quick, easy, say like pie charts of exactly where all your money is going, and having a much faster, like quicker, easy way to see, and you don't like spreadsheets, this book won't be for you either. So it depends on kind of what your learning style is, what type of system you're looking for, and if you want to be entering stuff manually or you want to be doing more app-based. So really completely up to you. But like I said, the beginning of the book, with kind of her overall philosophy about money and money management, is really valuable to read nonetheless. Another little quibble that I would have with this book, and I know it is predominantly focused on budgeting. This is not a book about retirement or investment planning. However, I feel like this is an area where many budgeting books kind of don't give enough emphasis to how critical it is to grow your money and start growing your money as early as possible. And I do feel like that's relevant when we talk about budgeting, because it's so important to be able to figure out how much do you need to be saving in your IRA, in your 401k, if you're saving for your children's college educations, how much are you saving in those 529 plans? So it's a whole conversation to have with your financial advisor, of course, with being able to identify those. But a lot of budgeting comes down to how much are we spending of our paycheck today, and then how much of it are we saving so that we can defer that money and have a retirement, or our children can go to college down the road, or at least we've got some college funding down the road, because a lot of that takes planning decades before when you're actually going to need that money. And so I do feel like it's very important, as we're building our budgets, no matter where you're starting out, to be able to prioritize investing, prioritize your retirement investments, and again, college funding if you've got children who are going to be going to college one of these days. And so she kind of only gives like a nod to those at the very tail end of the book. And there are whole other books that are specifically dedicated to how to fund college and how to fund your retirement. So obviously not the scope of this book, and you can't cover everything in one book. Also, this book is not very long, let's be honest. You know, it looks big, but it's only that big. So it's a good overview for budgeting, but that is something that I do feel like I would like to see emphasized more in practically every book about finance. It is so important to start your investment journey. Speak with an investment advisor, of course, but start your investment journey for those long-term wealth building goals with retirement in particular, starting that as early as possible, building that discipline of saving for retirement as early as possible. And even if it's just a little bit, and then adding to that as you go, it just lands you in such a different place. When I look back at what I wish I'd been doing differently the last 20 years, the number one thing is retirement investing. And I didn't know how to do that at the time, and I didn't know how important it was. Retirement sounded like a long way off when I was in my 20s, but it's something that I wish I'd done differently, because I'd be in a different place financially now if I'd started doing my retirement investments in my 20s. So really critical, I think, in any discussion about budgeting, to have a serious conversation about how much of the budget needs to be to retirement and investments, how much of that also needs to, for parents, to go to college savings as well. At the end of the day, I would give The Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence a solid 10 out of 10, because I have used this method myself for 10 years. I can personally attest to the fact that it works incredibly well to be able to have throughout your life with this particular budgeting system, it has worked for me as our income has been higher, when our income has been lower, when we've had interruptions in pay, when we've had big expenses, and it's always there for me. It's just kind of the backbone of your personal finances if you have a budget. And her system in particular, I have personally really, really liked. And again, I'll link in the description to my video that I've done on how I implement her system in Excel. If you don't want to purchase the book, or now's not a good time to be spending money on another book for your collection, you can watch that completely for free as well. So I'll link to that, but absolutely great book. Again, The Budget Kit by Judy Lawrence. And I really hope that you enjoy this book as much as I have.